Are you a professional pillow fighter? Or a 9-to-5 low-cost time travel agent? Or maybe real estate sales on Mars is your profession? It doesn't matter. Whatever it is you do, however complex or intricate, Monday.com can help you organize, orchestrate, and make it more efficient. Monday.com is the one centralized platform for everything work-related. And with Monday.com, work is just easier. Monday.com, for whatever you run. Go to Monday.com to learn more.
With Ring cameras and doorbells, it's easy to keep every fright in sight. See who's there. Keep your scaredy cats company.
Oh, it's okay, sweetie. I'll be home soon.
And protect your crypt from the real monsters.
Oh, come on. The sign says take one.
Find dead simple ways to stay connected right now at ring.com.
Welcome back to another episode of Investies. I'm your host, Linda Garcia. This week on the podcast, I'm going to share with you some updates from last week's episode, specifically pertaining to where we currently are in the market and what happened to the port strike. We're also going to get into historical trends in October on election year. So we'll get into all of that. I also want to share with you something extremely interesting that I learned about campaign funds. But before we get into that, I want to give a special shout out to Raquel Jimenez for becoming a Patreon member. Thank you so much, Raquel, for your investment in our Investies podcast. We really appreciate your contribution. If you want to check out our Patreon or learn how to become a member, head over to patreon.com/investies, where you will receive our episode early on Thursdays with no commercials. And then, of course, you'll get a special shout out here on our podcast. Thank you for your contribution, Raquel. And now back to the show. My son and I went to the grocery store yesterday. I needed to pick up some limes. And when I went to grab them, they were dry and hard. So they were already going bad. I looked at them and then I looked at the price and they were $1 each. I was shocked. I put them back. And my son said, "Is this because of the port strike?" Yes, son. Yes, it is because of the port strike. So the food that was going to be most affected for us in the United States with the port strike was going to be fruits. And although the port strike did end on Thursday, which, by the way, they got paid exactly what they wanted to get paid. The 61.5% increase on wages is exactly what they got, which is a true testament to what happens when folks come together and make a demand as a union. And although the strike did end last Thursday, we are still being impacted in the supply chain. So for every 1 day that they went on strike, it is being estimated that it will take a week to recover for the 1 day. And we were on strike for 3.5 days. So we are looking at about 3 weeks for us to normalize, although now there is Hurricane Milton in the mix. So there's that. What I really want to highlight that I think is really important in this conversation is how my 8-year-old son was quickly able to identify the cause of the increase in lime prices. The most asked question I get is, how do I talk to my children about money? Of course, there's always this fear, as I talk about in my book and as I talk about in my courses, on the transfer of scarcity mindset that we get from our parents. And of course, the goal is to not transfer the fear of money or scarcity to our children. My answer is always really simple. It's important for us to understand osmosis. Osmosis is the process of gradual or unconscious assimilation of ideas and knowledge. So it's basically the idea of being in a space And because you're in the space, you automatically begin to absorb the information that is around you. You're taking this information in. The same way we may have inherited a scarcity mindset or a worry for money or a fear for money from our parents is the same way we can inherit a positive relationship with money or understanding of money from our parents. The idea here is to focus on our own personal relationship with money, our beliefs surrounding money, how we interact with money, and then our children will naturally inherit those same actions. Of course, there are actionable items that we can teach our children in how to manage money, but what's going to have the most impact is your behavior around money. In other words, it is not what you say, it's what you do. I am a really big believer in learning by osmosis. I can reflect on my entire career and I can tell you that for the most part, my workplaces, although working in television, radio, and film, the environment was for the most part pretty mediocre. It wasn't until I got to Netflix that I was thrown into a realm with high producers, with some of the most intelligent people in the entire world. And it wasn't until I got to Netflix that I watched myself grow exponentially. I'm not going to lie, it was one of the most challenging environments that I've ever thrown myself into. In terms of having to learn and keep up, everything was my responsibility. There wasn't any questions that I could ask externally. We were all expected to figure it out ourselves. We had supervisors that were not there to give us the answers or guide us. They were there to see how we handled a problem and came up with a solution. It was honestly one of the most incredible experiences of my career to date. And so I think it's really important for us to not underestimate what our children are going to pick up just by the knowledge and personal experiences that we have. And so if we truly, I think, want our children to have a better life, it is important that we're focusing on ourselves and how we can personally improve. Now, I talk about this story in my book, where my son is watching a kid's film, and in the film, these kids are in a diner and someone walks into the diner to rob it. And when the man robs it and tells the cashier to give him all their money, my son pauses the movie, gets very emotional, and says, "I feel so bad for him." I didn't know who he was talking about. I'm like, is he talking about the boys that are scared under the table? Is he talking about the cashier that is currently being robbed? I never imagined that he was going to have empathy for the robber. And he said, "I feel bad for the man that is trying to steal money." And I said, "Why do you feel bad?" And he's like, "Because he's just looking for money and he doesn't know how to get it." Mind you, my son is 3 years old at the time that he's expressing this. And I asked him, "Where do you get money?" And he says, "From the stock market." It was such an obvious answer to him. And that was the moment where I was like, right, it's not just me that is learning by osmosis in whatever situations I'm in, which, by the way, Netflix is where I learned about the stock market. It is also my son that is learning by osmosis in his environment. It was conversations that he was listening to me have. And I do always try to include him in conversations. But at this point, he was 3 years old. And like any mother, you want to make sure that you're educating your children as much as you can and having them be a better person. And there's so much anxiety, I think, that goes into wanting to do the best that we forget that we just have to do the best for ourselves. And our children will, in fact, learn. And so my son at this point really taught me that he is learning via his environment. And so I do make sure to include him in conversations that are about the economy. The day that we had the port strike, we went to the grocery store and I explained that our supply chain could potentially be impacted depending on how long the strike was, and that in the next coming weeks, we may see an increase in prices in our food and other things. And, what was really interesting was a couple of days later, he was talking to his sister, my daughter, and explained to my daughter what was taking place with the strike. And I was just so impressed with his ability to explain to her in simple terms what was happening and how it could potentially affect her. So all of this to say that maybe our children should also be listening to Investies. No, I'm just kidding. All of this to say that the conversations that you have in your household are for sure impacting your children. I know we have so much news coming in right now with all the things on top of all the other things that it's important for us to be mindful on what type of content we're ingesting, because our children are also ingesting it, not just by what they're hearing, but energetically.
Welcome to What's the Best? Today's contestant is Jane. Ready to win, Jane?
Absolutely.
First question, what's the best match game?
Best Fiends?
Correct. Where can you collect the best, cutest creatures?
Best Fiends.
Right again. And now for the bonus question. Which game celebrates 10 years with 10 days of exclusive Unreal gifts?
Best Fiends.
You nailed it, Jane. Tell our audience what they should do.
Download for free on the App Store or Google Play.
Best Fiends.
Oh, it's such a clutch off-season pickup, Dave.
I was worried we'd bring back the same team.
I meant those blackout motorized shades.
Blinds.com made it crazy affordable to replace our old blinds.
Hard to install?
No, it's easy. I installed these and then got some for my mom. She talked to a design consultant for free and scheduled a professional measure and install.
Hall of Fame son.
They're the #1 online retailer of custom window coverings in the world.
Blinds.com is the GOAT.
Go to Blinds.com for 40% off site-wide. Blinds.com. Rules and restrictions may apply.
Moving on to stock market updates, we just hit a new all-time high in the S&P 500. It is absolutely incredible. I feel like we have been saying we just hit a new all-time high consistently all year, because we, in fact, have. It's just amazing for me to watch how much we have increased this year. I say this all the time. It is so important for us to be investing. Where we are struggling in some places of the economy with interest rates and it being difficult for most folks to afford a mortgage, or we're seeing just inflation out of control, we're seeing shrinkflation, there is this area in the market that is completely outperforming. It is doing incredible. So not too long ago, we talked about how election year impacts the stock market. Since 1950, the stock market has accurately predicted the presidential election. If the stock market is up August, September, and October, then we can expect for the incumbent party to win the election. This prediction has 83% accuracy, dating as far back as 1928. If we take a look at the stock market from its lowest point in August, we are looking at an increase on the S&P 500 of 11.46% as of today, Wednesday, October 9th. This means that as of right now, the stock market is predicting that Vice President Harris will become the next president. We'll see what happens in these next couple of weeks. Historically, on election years, the market has been very volatile in October. So we can expect high volatility. I believe this is because the market is trying to identify, we're getting closer to November, who the party winner will be. So these next couple of weeks are going to be really important to this historical data, this prediction that we've had since 1928. So we'll see what actually takes place. Moving on to our next topic, I wanted to share with you all that recently I was filling out a form to report all of my funds from campaigning, and I learned that you are able to invest your campaign funds. I found this to be completely shocking, but then not as shocking, I guess, if I stop to think about it. It makes perfect sense, given who typically gets to write the rules here in Texas, that you would be able to use your campaign funds to invest in real estate, invest in the stock market, basically invest how you see fit. Can you believe that? Can you imagine having a portfolio so big that it is generating campaign funds that can help sustain your campaign? That blows my mind. Anyways, I quickly opened up a money market account for my campaign funds, which I'm super excited about. And then I am currently looking at opening up a stock market portfolio for my campaign funds. I definitely want to do something that is low risk. I am identifying how much money I will need during this next session. And then I'm identifying how much money I can actually invest and how much money should be kept in a money market account that I can have easy access to. Now, as I gain seniority through this process, I will definitely start to strategize completely different than how I'm strategizing right now. And I will definitely get into investing a little more aggressively and potentially purchasing stocks, direct shares. Right now, I think what I am considering is potentially putting a portion of the money into an S&P 500, something like that, I feel pretty comfortable and low risk level. But something more aggressive than that, it would have to be deeper into my seniority, where I have enough funds that I don't necessarily need to tap into in the near future. In the event that the market does go down, I do have some time to wait it out. It's so crazy to me that reporters on CNBC are not allowed to invest into the stock market, but politicians are allowed to have campaign portfolios. Now, don't quote me on this in terms of this being legal outside of Texas. It is definitely legal and within my right to do so in Texas. So you better believe that I will be exercising that right. As I mentioned, I've already begun. I've opened up different types of accounts so that I can make sure that I'm generating a return on my campaign funds. On that note, I wanted to share with you all that I do have a fundraiser coming up on November 7th in Los Angeles, California. A couple of weeks ago, you may have heard the episode where I'm being interviewed by the lawyer Gina Zapanta. Her and her husband graciously offered to host a fundraiser for me out there in their home in LA. And of course, I took them up on the generous offer, so I will be there on November 7th. I wanted to extend an invitation to our listeners. In our show notes, I'll have a link to the event. Tickets to join us start at $250. And once you make that donation via the link that I will include, we will send you the information, the location of where the fundraiser is going to take place. I hope that I get to see and meet some of you all. This is also a celebration of sorts on this massive pivot in my life. Some of you all have been following this journey ever since the OG podcast, Let There Be Luz, and there have been so many transformations throughout this entire process. Who would have thought that this is where I'd be? Certainly not me. I hope you enjoyed listening to this week's episode of Investies. I'm your host, Linda Garcia. Investies is a Cosmic Standard and In Luz We Trust production. A special thank you to the team, Asia Simpson, Eliza Smith, and Jacob Winnick.